Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much for having us. All right, so I guess let's start. I think we were targeting just 1 hour here because it is a Friday night. So thanks everyone for joining. And I guess let's start with introductions. So let's start with Jess. Yeah, Jess, can you say where you're from and what your purpose is here and yeah, all the good stuff.
Sure. I'm Jess Haberman. I'm Senior Acquisitions Editor for Data Science and Data Engineering at O'Reilly Media. And I live in Salem, Massachusetts, which is Halloween Central right now, just FYI.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, are people trick-or-treating out there?
Yeah, they're doing all the things.
Are they? Like there's nothing going on. Okay. Go Massachusetts. How about Rustem? Go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm machine learning engineer at Instrumental and the author of the book Hands-on Serverless Deep Learning with TensorFlow and AWS Lambda. So
here's the book.
I'm currently at San Jose, California. And
cool. How about Robert?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Rob. I am here in sunny San Francisco. I'm a machine learning scientist and I'm the author of Human in the Loop Machine Learning.
How about Francesco?
Hi everyone, my name is Francesco. I'm also in San Francisco. I wrote a book called Zero to Deep Learning and now I run an online bootcamp with the same name.
Yeah, I never got a physical copy of that, I don't think. Did I, Francesco? No.
Nope, there's an online version of it.
Yeah.
You can have a PDF version of it.
And then one of my favorite people in the world, probably the person I know the longest, Dean.
Hey, I'm Dean Wampler. I work at the Domino Data Lab and live in Chicago, actually, where it's cold today. So I've written a few books for O'Reilly and reports. Most recently, What is Ray? About the Ray system, if you've heard about that in the data world. And also Programming Scala is a book I'm working on right now at New Edition.
Cool. And so, yeah, let's start with you, I guess, Dean. Can you tell us, so why did you write the Scala book, back in the day? That was your first one, right?
That was the first one. Yes, it came out in 2009. The world has changed a lot since then. And I think it's a good lesson for everybody. I'd start blogging about Scala, and I'd been thinking for a long time I'd love to write a book about something that had sort of been an aspiration. And one thing kind of led to another. I thought, why don't we do a book about this? It was still kind of early days for Scala, at least as far as most people outside academia were concerned. So I got together with a co-author from Twitter named Alex Payne, and we wrote probably the second book on Scala, I think it was, maybe the third, but anyway, and we're still doing it.
Yeah, so how did you pick the co-author?
In this case, I told O'Reilly at the time that I hadn't been using Scala much in industry, so I didn't feel like I had a good sense of how it works in the real world compared to kind of just diving in on my own. And they had already been talking to Alex, who was at Twitter at the time, and Twitter was the first big user of Scala, so he had a lot of practical experience with it in the real world. So they put us together, and one thing led to another, and the magic just happened after that.
Okay, cool. And who else here has a co-author? Rustem, yeah, you didn't have a co-author, right? I think based on this here. Yeah, it's just you, I think. Yeah, did you think, Rustem, about getting a co-author? And yes, how did you come about writing the book?
So basically, I started I had an open source repo where I put different packages for AWS Lambda, and I started kind of to get more on machine learning side, and basically started to look more and more how you can run different machine learning deep learning use cases using serverless infrastructure. And then I understood that basically there is something interesting, and it kind of there are a lot of patterns, a lot of ways how you can actually deploy it, and it could be useful to a lot of people. So that's how I decided to start it. I didn't try to find co-authors, mainly because like I wasn't very sure how the book would look like. So basically, at the start, like I kind of got the final idea about how the book would look like only by the end of writing it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point, right? So was there some point where you were Googling for things and just nothing was coming up? Like, is that kind of what made you realize I actually have some real world knowledge that could be shared?
Yes, so both with this, that like there weren't a lot of blog posts. So there were blog posts maybe about how to like just port some library on Lambda, but not a lot of like real kind of like examples or like architectures which could be implemented. And also like a repository got some traction, so that was also a good signal.
Gotcha. And did you rely on some of the contributors or the watchers of your repo to like give you feedback? Yeah, how did you find reviewers?
Well, I try to use my network for reviewers because like I didn't have a lot of contributors with open source repository. So basically I try to use my network.
Gotcha. Okay, and then Francesco, you
Yep.
are self-published, and yeah, I remember seeing you at the gym, and yeah, so we used to live right next to each other. Now you're just a couple blocks away, but yeah. So how did this come out? What prompted you to write this book?
Yeah, so I was at the time running weekend classes, and one of my students actually asked me, "Hey, have you ever thought of writing a book?" And he, at the time, was a partner in a very small publishing company that were publishing books on developer books. And so I said, no, I'd never thought about that, and sounded like an interesting idea. So I wrote the book and initially published it with them, and then eventually ended up reacquiring the IP. So in that sense, I'm self-published, although initially the book was published with this company.
Gotcha. And what are some kind of lessons learned from your experience with this?
Lots. I would, if I were to go do it again, I would probably go with a publisher, like with the biggest publishers. It depends. It really, for me, the lessons learned were two primarily. One, it takes a lot longer than you think, and doing it alone is a lot of work because not only you're thinking of the content and thinking through like what you're going to talk about in the book, but you're also dealing with like things like editing or making editorial choices that, if you have a publisher, helps you. And number two, I think it boils down to why are you writing the book. I think there is a reason, there is an argument for self-publishing, which I think, especially for first-time authors, it can potentially be more, can generate more income for you. So if you're doing it to generate income, probably self-publishing is a good idea because you're an unknown author. But it will never generate as much exposure as going with a publisher, unless you're an influencer that already has a following of millions of people. So if you're doing it like to get your name out, then going with a publisher is a much easier and better route, I think. Did we lose Chris? I think you're muted.
Okay, I had to disconnect from the VPN because it was bad connection. Yeah, so note to self, don't do that. Okay. Yeah, did you make it? Yeah, like, did you finish your answer?
Yeah. I don't know if I got disconnected, but yeah.
So yeah, so basically self-publish if you're, so think about why you're actually writing the book, right? And like what and so you PhD and come from academic background, right? So
yeah.
Yeah. So was it always a life goal for you to write a book, or?
No, not at all. When these guys asked, I thought it was an interesting challenge. And to be honest, I completely underestimated the effort of writing a book. I thought I would be done in a couple of months, and instead it took me a couple of years to finish the book properly. I think the best thing I got out of it was that it forced me to really dig into the things I was writing about and become an expert. Like I thought I really understood everything I was going to write about, but instead I really had to like read other books and study and watch other courses to understand what I was explaining, because through the process of writing down things, you realize how many gaps you actually have that you didn't even know you had.
Yeah, one thing I've always liked about your style, because I've taken like your workshops in the past, and you can certainly explain things very well. And one thing I have trouble with, I'm currently writing the book like data science on like Amazon Web Services, and I'm always trying to figure out how deep I should go. So how did you choose that, right? And because I can picture you seeing the feedback from your weekend workshops and sort of knowing when people's eyes, like glaze over. So you had that advantage, right?
Yeah, and even with that advantage, some things I got completely wrong. So I guess my answer to that is you don't really know until you have your first edition out and then you get feedback from your users. I definitely had the feedback from my students, and I had tuned the material to that. But for example, there's a chapter in the book where I thought it was valuable to explain the backpropagation calculation for neural nets, and went really quite deep into the maths because it was a book. I don't do that in class. And then realized that most of the students would skip that. And so I ended up putting a giant banner that said, maths ahead, you can skip it if you want. It's not necessary for the next chapters. And in one of the new editions, we ended up doing that. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, because we put out our book for review to our reviewers, and I noticed that there's certain sections where nobody commented. It's a Google Doc, and yes, I could tell there's certain parts either people think it's too deep or it's not relevant. So I've personally been sort of learning, so based on like gaps like that. So Rob, you had mentioned at some point that you actually chose to do PyTorch instead of TensorFlow for your book, right? Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, why did you choose that versus what you were?
Yeah, that's right. So I thought if I was gonna sit down and spend 2 months writing a book, which turned out to be 2 years, of course, that I wanted to learn something myself. So when I was writing my book, I thought I was reasonably familiar with most of the algorithms, or it turned out not to be true as well. And I didn't want it just to be a matter of writing them out in a framework I was already familiar with, like TensorFlow. And so because I hadn't previously used PyTorch, it was just gaining popularity, or really accelerating popularity when I started writing my book. I thought it'd be a good opportunity to level up my own skills and implement it all in PyTorch. So that was something like I really enjoyed. It let me professionally build a good relationship with the folks at PyTorch as well, and write a couple of guest blog posts with them. So I would encourage anyone thinking about writing a book to do the same. You probably are going to learn something along the way. So if you can be mindful about what it is you want to learn, you're going to feel a lot better about that process.
So what motivated you to write the book, like initially?
Like anger and disillusionment were my main motivating factors. I'd continually seen some incredibly smart people come out of PhD programs or vocational machine learning courses and they only knew about the algorithm side of things. So they were great at designing architectures and hyperparameter tuning and being innovative in research in those directions. But as I'm sure most people at this conference don't need to be sold on, you'll spend as much, maybe more time on the data side, creating good training data, ensuring quality from annotators, trying to decide who the right annotators are and writing the right guidelines. When in practical data science, and so that was just missing in most people's skill set, and there wasn't one book that covered that either. So I think I say in the forward of my book, this is what I wish was the first book someone had given me in my very first job. So yeah, it was my anger and disillusionment about the skill set of, of people in machine learning that motivated it.
And so how did you find a publisher, or like, did they reach out to you? Yes, how did that happen?
Yeah, I over the years, a few publishers have kind of like just reached out at various times to see if I was interested in writing books, typically on this topic, because I've been involved in like data annotation and training data and active learning for a while. I specifically worked with many because I wanted help. I don't really have any friends, or at least none that would write a book with me. So as a solo author, I wanted a lot of support. And in addition to my editor, I have one reviewer who reviews every chapter as I write them, and she's like a really smart professor in this area. In addition, they provide a panel of about a dozen reviewers at 3 times throughout the book who go through like all my work. And that's in addition to people in my network that I bring into review. So it really brought they really brought a lot of resources with them, which made me know that, you know, I was going to write a better and more clearer book than I could ever possibly write without that help.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, so Jess, so you're kind of on the other side of this, right? Like, yeah, so you're out there looking for authors, and can you talk a little bit about how do you find people? Is it, you know, conferences? I've seen you plenty of times at like various conferences, not just the O'Reilly ones, but some of the local, like San Francisco ones as well too.
Yeah, that's right. It's definitely a lot of networking, which is a lot harder this year without in-person conferences. Certainly been attending some virtual conferences, but it's definitely harder to really to connect with folks, you know, who are also attending. It's not like you can just like grab a couple of minutes in the hallway or you know, set up a time for lunch. So so that's a little trickier these days. But yeah, a lot of time is just doing a lot of research, you know, following, you know, like there's a lot on Medium that, you know, gives me a good sense of sort of, you know, Towards Data Science is a great publication to sort of see like what's bubbling up to the top. You know, just asking people, a lot of times I'll just, you know, I'll just sort of check in with folks that I have a relationship with, and I've done this with Dean quite a few times. Hey, like, what are you seeing? What's going on? Like, what's interesting? What should we be paying attention to? So I definitely go to some trusted voices to really know what's, you know, I don't come from a tech background, so I have to kind of see what, you know, it's all, a lot of it is new to me. So figuring out like what's the important stuff and what's trending, and then figuring out like who are the trusted voices. It's a lot of Googling, a lot of kind of stalking people online, and just trying to get as many different opinions as I can, and not really just believing one, just trying to get see patterns in a lot of what people are talking about.
And can you like describe what makes a good book proposal? What are the, you know,
Sure.
top 3 or 4 things?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is that it's well researched, that the author has a really good sense of, you know, what they're writing, who they're writing for, and has some clear understanding of what the market is for that content. You know, so knows if there are other books published on the topic. There usually is something out there, you know, and why this is a good time for their book, you know, and what the selling points are for their book. You know, maybe it's more comprehensive, maybe it's more up to date, or, you know, maybe they, you know, just are a better author for, you know, maybe they realize they have more expertise in that area. So being able to really, because it's all about the business decision we're making at O'Reilly, and where we're investing our time and resources. So making the business case for the book is really the most important thing. But certainly being able to write well is very helpful. Being a real expert in the field, not just that you want to write a book and you're sort of interested in a topic. Like I really want you to have a very informed opinion about the topic and have a sense of where it's going, and why, have a sense of that topic is going to be relevant for 3 to 5 years in print, because that's the business that we're in. Different publishers have different priorities in different formats that they're working with. So that's those are the areas that we're paying a lot of attention to in a proposal. And like these guys have been talking about getting their content reviewed. I have folks review proposals to make sure it feels legit. That if there's often something we missed. So folks will often find that in the table of contents, and that's a helpful part of the process too.
Yes, I remember waiting for you guys to respond to us, back in like December, January. I think we were back and forth, up and down, we were looking into every single response to see if, had like smile faces or exclamation points. So,
yep.
Yeah. And like, we put a lot of work into that. I remember our proposal, and I had just come from my startup where we were doing, fundraising and pitch decks and trying to get customers. And so we had value prop kind of experience and, total addressable market and competition, all those things. So yeah, it was very similar. Mm-hmm. Jess, can you comment, what makes a good author, just based on your experience?
Well, I think most important is that they have clear expertise in the field, but that they're also curious. They don't believe that like they know everything, because writing a book is a start of a process. Like you're going to figure out a lot of it while you're writing, and it's going to involve a lot of research. And if you think you like already know everything, or you're coming to me with a book already fully written, that's not necessarily what I want. I want you to be really digging in and exploring the areas that you're not familiar with, and sort of going outside your comfort zone and making sure you're understanding, sort of all sides of the topic, and talking to other people in the area. So having a good network is great, not only because you get sort of those other opinions, but also you can promote your book, to other folks who are going to be interested in reading it and who are going to feel, like they want to support you. So that's great too. Being a good writer is, like I said, helpful. It's not the highest priority for me. There are ways that we can help. And often, there's a lot of times when we have multiple authors in a book, and then sometimes it's that combination of authors that sort of form kind of a great team to really make a book a success.
Yeah, similar to startups, and especially here in the Bay Area, these VCs really like, groups of people and people that have like known each other for a while, that like work together. Seems to be a little bit of a bias against, sole founders and things. I found this out, firsthand. So yes, I could imagine you kind of assess the group of people if there's like 2 or 3. Yes, is there a sweet spot, right, that you've noticed that 2 is good, but 3's, three's a crowd kind of thing?
I mean, I don't necessarily, I think there are pros and cons to having co-authors. I don't think it's necessarily always better, because if you have very different voices or different opinions, or different, you might just have you manage time very differently. You're on different sides of the country or the world. It can be really complicated. So very often we'll have books where somebody bails, and we've got to try to keep it going, or sometimes just 2 co-authors don't really work well together, and that's the end of that book, and you have to start from square one again. So it depends, I think Dean was very lucky to be paired with another author and have that chemistry, because I think that's very hard to sort of pull 2 parties together, or 2 or more parties together, and like send them off into the wild to write. So it depends. Sometimes I do really prefer a solo author who's really motivated and can keep things really consistent throughout the book. It totally depends on the process and the content that they're working on.
Yeah, I know some of the feedback we've gotten from like Gary, who's our development editor, is, keeping me and my co-author's voice the same, saying we or I, or, changing tenses. And that's my co-author is like German as well. So she's all the way across the country. And yeah, so just trying to find like a consistent voice, especially when we like take over the second part of a chapter and she'll start like the first part of the next chapter. And yeah, just moving things around as well too. Yeah, it's been kind of tricky.
You gotta have a system. I think the more co-authors you have, the more complicated it is. So probably, like, to answer your original question that you asked, probably like 2 is a good number.
Yeah, the Kubeflow for machine learning book has what, like 7 co-authors or something? It's
a lot.
All right. Can you comment, how have things changed since COVID? In terms of,
I think.
Yeah,
I think it's tough. It's just a lot of unknowns. People are really uncertain about what kind of what their future is going to look like, what their workload is going to be. I think early on in this sort of, when the virus sort of just started, folks were really hesitant to start a big project like a book. Like we were talking about, a book can take 1 to 2 years to write. Not really knowing what the future looked like makes it really hard to commit to a project like that. And then once we realized it wasn't like going away real quickly, more folks were like, okay, actually, I think a lot of folks during this time have really like reimagine what their priorities are, and in a lot of cases, like kind of saying, all right, I'm going to do the thing I want to do, and that is write a book, and they put all their energies into it, and they've decided they're going to put other things aside, and that works great, if you're able to do that. But a lot of other folks are dealing with like kids at home now, and like, or their job is like maybe not as stable as it was before, or they're looking for a new job, and that can make things really complicated. So it's not easier, I'll say that. But we sort of have to roll with the punches and figure things out. But there are still great opportunities. We're still publishing lots of books, and some really good ones. So I'm still feeling very positive.
I'd like to point out that the coronavirus has gone away quickly in other parts of the world.
Yeah, good point.
Just want to flag that.
Yeah, so Robert, what like sort of reading level did you go after? Like, did you think about that?
So I kind of 2 minimum qualified readers in mind. One was someone who had just taken their first machine learning course, has graduated from that. So this could be someone late in their first or in their second year of college, or an engineer who is looking to switch or to add machine learning to their work. So in both cases, someone who is technical, but keeping in mind the engineer might not have the theoretical training in machine learning, making sure I kind of hit that right practical note where I could explain some of the like more hairy mathematical concepts in a way that didn't patronize those who already knew it, or it didn't leave behind those who did not.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, so Dean, so you have kind of the unique experience where you wrote a Scala book kind of pre-Spark, and then I think second edition, did you like update it to have Spark, and now it's the third edition. Can you talk about, over 10 years, how has the book and the sort of target audience changed and some of the content?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting question, how something that's essentially what you would think is the same content actually has to reflect a different audience. Going to the general question of who's your audience. The second edition, so I think I said the first edition came out in the fall of I went after who'd maybe heard of Scala, but almost nobody was using it at that point. And the second edition came out 5 years later in the fall of 2014, when Spark was actually driving adoption of Scala, and maybe along with Kafka, because they're both written in Scala. I didn't actually change the book too much, except to expand content on like I had a big data chapter, which I'm actually removing from this edition because we've kind of passed that peak. I'm still thinking about, mostly an enterprise development Scala, more pragmatic introduction, but one this is a struggle for me actually, has been, do I make it really a beginner book and very light, or do I go ahead and cover almost everything, but ease them into it and let people just decide how far they want to go off the deep end, so to speak. And that's sort of where I tend to fall, is make it comprehensive, but really aimed at the pragmatist who wants to know, why is this important to me? Why should I care about this crazy feature kind of thing?
Yes, is it too late to change to Python? Like, could you slip in, just call it programming with Python? Maybe.
The crazy thing about Scala, if I'm writing about the new version coming out, Scala 3, they're actually introducing a syntax that looks more like Python than Java. No braces, more indentation, and it's partly to appeal to people who are coming from the Python world. So no alternative syntax. So, yes, to answer your question.
Yeah, so Rustem, what was your target audience? Yeah, how did you come up? Yeah, was it just a single target audience? Was it multiple? And like, how did you make those trade-offs while you were writing? Can you give an example?
So I kind of focused, so maybe there were like two target audiences, because like I wanted to design a book to be more like on practical aspects of deploying something to the cloud. So it kind of was focused on one hand on people who basically are data scientists and want to put the model like in public to basically to make it work in production. And on another hand, people who come more from engineering side to basically get exposure to what it means, basically introducing deep learning model to your production infrastructure. So like, do you need complex infrastructure? Can you do it with something simple, but also have like good scalable results? So I think because of it, I kind of tried to add more introduction to deep learning as well, but maybe in a shorter way. So probably people who are already aware of it, like they would skip this kind of like chapters, but maybe people who, but at the same time, there was a chapter about AWS. So people who are more familiar with cloud would skip that chapter. So there is certain advantages and disadvantages. So I could probably, if I would target it only at one audience, I could write less chapters, but I try to kind of keep it somewhat flexible.
Yeah, one thing, I remember trying to decide, and actually still have to think about this, is like there's always 20 or 30 pages I write where I realize, well, this probably might just go into the appendix, right? And so I'm constantly putting everything into the appendix, pulling it out, or I'm putting stuff into a tip box that's now like 2 or 3 pages, and it's a gigantic tip box, and it doesn't even fit on a single page. So yeah, and those things really come from who is the target audience. And I certainly remember having that discussion with like Jessica quite a bit about who the target audience is. Is it DevOps folks that are trying to learn machine learning? Is it data scientists trying to go from notebook into the cloud? Really is has kind of become our primary scaling out machine learning into the cloud. So yeah, nailing those down pretty early really helps out. Yeah, Francesco, can you talk a little bit about your writing, like the time of day that you wrote? And yes, obviously I used to see you at the gym down the street, and you would be super exhausted and didn't want to write. So you kind of switched your like workout, like routine. Can you talk about, just like day to day, how did you?
For me, I found that writing in the morning was really more effective than writing after the day had started. I was not writing full time. I was still running my consulting company at the same time. And so writing really requires like total focus and your creative brain to be kind of activated. And so I found that blocking off 2-3 hours in the early morning and then doing the writing and then getting the rest of the day going, if it's possible, that was for me much more productive than trying to write in the late part of the day when all the other priorities have started to, like, you know, clog you, and you don't have as much bandwidth and creativity.
Yeah, Dean, I think you said the same thing too. I had asked you a couple years ago what your style was like, and it was the mornings, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, often it is. Actually, right now, because the company I work for is on the West Coast, I'll often spend an hour writing in the morning before the day really starts there.
Gotcha. All right, let's see. Yeah, Dean, what would you, so I'm curious because, like, yeah, so you have quite a bit of experience writing. Like, do you go back after you've published the book and thought, oh, like that was a really crappy chapter, or maybe, or something changed? Can you, yeah, how do you fight those demons, right? Like, I'll go day to day, I'll write something on a plane, and then, you know, on the flight back, I just change everything because I hated whatever I wrote. Yeah. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I do this. Everything that I've encountered that I might want to mention in the book, because I hate to overlook something that people might consider important, or I might wish that I'd told them about. But then I'm also at this, like I said, Scala is kind of interesting in this kind of evolution now, where I don't feel like I need to cover everything as much as I did in the first edition. And I'm trying to be more strategic about what really matters to people and what can they, you know, find on the web by Googling and so forth, which is another aspect of this whole thing now, right? Is so much information is out there just searching. What is unique that we can deliver to people? What message, or how can we encapsulate information or whatever that is actually something that people are willing to pay money for? So I don't worry about it as much as I used to, but I do try to sweat the details enough that I really feel like I've done them a good service if they've taken the time to, you know, pay me money or whatever and read something I wrote.
Yeah, and I remember, like you also said, to try not to reference different, you know, parts of the book too much. Like, I think the example was saying in the previous section, you know, blah, 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 and then suddenly you would change the order of the chapters or sections. So yeah, right. Like, can you give any other tips like that?
Yeah, actually a big tip, something that I didn't do as well in the first edition was actually dinged in reviews, was like forward referencing, like, right, here's a little bit about this feature, but in this chapter we'll go into it in detail. That just really annoyed people, and I can understand why. So I've really been careful about progressive disclosure, but then not overwhelming them with detail when they don't need it at a stage, but not also telling them, all right, I'm just later. I think the best book ever written in our field that does this extremely well is Structure Interpretation of Computer Programs, which is that famous MIT book that uses scheme by Suston and Abelson. Anyway, that one was really brilliant at just this progressive disclosure, only showing you what you needed to know, not introducing things prematurely and kind of building up. To me, that's the hardest thing about writing, I think, is figuring out how to structure the information that does that. It really is.
Again, so forward referencing is a bad thing? That's what you're saying?
Like, I really feel like I need to say, look, I can't talk about this right now because you don't have enough information yet, but here's where you'll find out more. But if you overdo it, it kind of annoys people if they're constantly having to flip back and forth or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. I gotta go do a rewrite now. Okay. Sounds like really good advice.
Yeah, I would agree on that. It does annoy people. And sometimes you can't help it because it makes sense to introduce things in layers as well.
Mm.
So you will revisit, you know, the same topic, but it leaves people hungry for more. And if you do it too much, then it will.
Yeah.
And they're too hungry, right?
Yeah. But if you think about it, there's this graph of information in our heads, right? And we're trying to figure out a linear path through it that makes the most sense. And that's a tough challenge, I think. Yeah,
Robert, do you have any tips?
Well, apparently not. Apparently I'm getting that wrong. Yeah, I mean, like someone said already, I ended up writing more than I expected. And part of it was this problem of introducing too much. So I wanted to introduce active learning. I ended up splitting that into basically 3 sections: one on active learning, one on advanced methods, and then one of applying active learning to different kinds of problems like semantic segmentation or sequence labeling for text. Because when I tried to put that all together, it was, to extend Dean's analogy, it was like I took that graph of information and just smushed it on the page. So yeah, it took a while to, even though I knew what I wanted to speak about, it took a while to find that right linear order that took the readers on the right journey.
Gotcha. And so these are all technical books, of course. Can you give some tips, yeah, Rob, about keeping the code samples and the screenshots in sync, and yes, anything you can provide there?
Oh, I completely failed on that. I mean, I just kept an open repo, and I thought I'd kept everything up to date in the versions, and I keep finding out I didn't. And people keep complaining, and it's always my fault. So hopefully someone else has some better advice on
that. Yeah, Jess. Yeah, how about you? Yeah, because you've seen a lot of books. Yeah.
Well, I can't really help you too much with the keeping track of your figures. I don't know, like I would just, in my old days when I would have to keep track of that, when I was a development editor, I would just open an Excel sheet and just like throw together a log. Sometimes it's just like literally the best way to do it. But yeah, but other tips, I think like we kind of keep talking about like how much to include, and especially like if you're revising a book, like, you know, a new book doesn't have to be longer, you know, it can be more condensed, it can be more targeted, and like that is like really what we want to try to achieve, because like, you know, often more than half of the sales of these books are print books, at least like that's what we see most of the time. So we're still relying on this sort of linear learning. It means like you're trying to include so much, you're getting into like 500-600 pages, it's very expensive. And you lose people's attention. So finding ways to really hone your message is very often, I think, linked to knowing who your audience is, what background they have, what they're, you know, what information they're looking for, and trying to avoid like the tangential or anything like, oh, they might want to know this, you know, but like really having a sense of like, I want, you know, this is for this person and this is for this person, and like that's it, and really sticking to your guns there, because, you know, a book that's for everyone is for no one. So having a real clear target is very helpful.
Actually, yes, I remember you saying that, because I think some of our like earlier like proposals were like, oh yeah, this is for like everyone that uses AWS, and you're like, no, yeah, that doesn't work. And I feel it now. I didn't understand it then, but I certainly feel it now, trying to make decisions on. And what is your sort of guidance on words versus code versus figures? And yes, I know it like probably depends, but can you just give some guidance there? Because we actually started with a code base and added a bunch of figures, and now we're actually trying to fill in the words, and which is, I think, opposite of someone like Dean, who has a lot of words. But yeah, Jess, can you comment?
Yeah, well, it totally depends. You know, like I think it's like personal preference a lot of times. I don't think there's one way that like, even if you have a clear target audience, like there's not one way they like to learn. You know, some people are more visual. Some people want to learn through all the code and they just want to like sort of download it that way. And some people really need to like sift through the words and understand really the kind of how you walk them through the story, you know, of why they need to know things, you know. So that's hard to accomplish in any other way. You know, and I think we're dealing with these sort of digital products that can have supplementary products where you can accomplish you know, code samples in a Jupyter notebook, or you know, we're working a lot with Catalit with these like problem solution scenarios now. And we're lucky to have this really robust online platform where you can do a lot of these online learning, you know, practice. So there's so many ways for people to learn, and I think it's like where's your strength, you know, and how do you feel like you can best teach what you want them to know, and trying to keep in mind that, you know, you want some variety, but you know, sort of do it your way. And if it's lacking, you're ideally, or, you know, if you're working with reviewers or editors, they're going to help you find out where those spots are that you need to sort of fill in gaps.
Sure. Yeah, Dean, can you comment? And yes, I'm curious with you and your co-author, did one of you like do more code samples and then the other one was doing more of the writing, or was it pretty equal?
The way we split it up actually was by chapter. So I'd write this chapter, he'd write that chapter, et cetera. And I think we kind of triangulated towards a happy medium of code versus you know, text. Yeah, but it's an interesting, you know, I think a lot of us though probably prefer to see code because that makes it kind of crystal clear, especially if we know the language, whereas you can get lost in the verbosity of text. And I tend to be verbose, so I really have to think about this. But and then figures, I don't have many in my book, and that's something I think I'd like to have more of if I could figure out the right things that don't just add fluff, but actually convey real meaning in a concise way.
Cool. Yeah, so Francesco, how did you find a good balance? Or did you find a good balance, in your opinion?
I don't know if I found a good balance.
And what prompted you to put code in there versus just describing it, right?
So initially I started with mostly code, and I wrote the whole book in Jupyter Notebooks, right? So that was something that for me was really important because it allowed me to keep the code in sync and avoid typos and bugs in the code. So I actually started from the code and then put the explanations between the code, and the feedback I kept receiving from the guys I was working with where I should put more explanation and have more text between the code lines. So for me, that was really like the process. I started from code and then added more text.
Cool. Yeah, hey Rob, what books are you currently reading?
I'm
Tech
reading,
or like otherwise, yeah.
yeah. I'm reading Radical Candor at the moment. I am reading about leadership.
Heard great things about it.
Yeah, it is way easier to read than anything I've ever written. I mean that as a compliment. It's pretty easy to get through. I'm not reading anything particularly technical at the moment, but I'm senior area chair for an upcoming track at a ACO conference in Europe. So I'm reading a lot of papers because of that.
Cool. And so did you read while you were writing?
So
were
much.
You reading other?
Oh yeah. Like, there was this whole pocket of like about 100 published papers in computer vision, active learning, and my background's natural language processing. So I hadn't read any of it. So I had to really get up to speed on that. And like so many people, I'd never read a lot of the foundational papers in my field, like some from the 1970s. And I tried to implement some of those algorithms, first principles based on those papers, which is the closest I've come to crying in recent years. And I found it all really enjoyable, like at least to look back on. It was type B fun.
Yes. How about you, Rustem? Yeah, like, yes. What are you currently reading? And so were you reading while you were writing?
So currently I'm rereading Designing Data Intensive Applications because I read it like some time ago and kind of like want to refresh my memory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And I know it's actually like when designing a book, like it's pretty challenging because on one hand, you kind of like always want to research more to get like more in details. And after you read a lot of, you kind of want to put a lot of the things you learned in your book. And you can, at some point, it's very hard to stop yourself like that. You need to actually decrease like and find like kind of like compile the insight in a short way and maybe just like formulate it there, and maybe just say that like, okay, that part could be read like in a different, like make some reference to another book. So I think, yeah, I definitely read a lot and tried to watch a lot and see like maybe somebody posted something on it, like to get inside like whether somebody already posted something, but also whether somebody already read about it, whether like readers are aware of some concept or not.
Yeah, this happened to me with this quantum book here. Not sure if I think the background, but I finished this quantum book, and now I'm trying to squeeze quantum into the book on like AWS, which we do have a quantum service. So, yeah, Rustem, if you were to write a book today, what would you be writing on?
Good question. So I think it would be on a similar topic of using cloud. Maybe I would try to design it in a different way, because I think one thing which I learned like recently when I tried to design, like I participated with O'Reilly like live trainings, and for me the main challenge was trying to find the best way to deploy something in the cloud which it would be easy to use by people who are trying to learn it. Because basically usually you have a config file, but you need to go to command line and do a lot of stuff, and usually you have like readme which you go through. And the one thing which I decided to do, I made a Jupyter notebook where basically I put like the whole configuration where you can go through the whole thing. And actually, Chris, thank you for suggesting it, because like I think you're using Jupyter Notebook for deploying like configuration and like cloud services as well. And I think like I would restructure book to use a lot of like this part, because it's so it was convenient, and you can merge like code calling command line and with text and examples. So I think that's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been trying to actually pull that out for some reason, but yeah, now maybe we'll keep it in. It's just it just gotten out of hand, you know. There's just so much like error handling, and but yeah, we'll talk about that offline. Yeah, Jess, what are you reading right now?
Well, I'm like the worst editor of all time, so I read a lot of proposals, and then I run a writing group, so I read a lot of people's like fiction, nonfiction all the time. I was reading Dean's "What Is Ray" report the other day. That was that was pretty exciting. But can I? No, it's great. It's great. But can I also, like, instead of answering that question, just jump on something that Rustem mentioned about online training, because I expect that there's a lot of, you know, aspiring authors, you know, on this call, or people who are thinking about writing a book. How do I get started? And online training is a really great way to sort of get your wheels spinning on a topic and start to, you know, anticipate what questions people might have, and start to like formulate some problems and solutions for an audience. So, you know, we host that on our site. There's plenty of other places to do it as well. So I highly recommend that, especially if you're feeling like, am I ready for a book? Like, this sounds really like way more work than I really want to do. Then that's something to think about, is, you know, presenting at a conference, or doing some online, you know, presenting online training on the topic that you're working in, and where you know people are really having some challenges.
Yeah, so how do people get a hold of you? Or yeah, what's the first step? Is there a template? Is there a—
Thanks for asking, Chris. There is a template, as you well know. Chris wrote one of the best book proposals I think I got, like, and I still use it as an example. So get a hold of Chris and ask him for tips. But just kidding. So you can go to, you can get in touch with me. I'm on Whova, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. You know, you'll find me. But also on the O'Reilly site, it's o'reilly.com/workwithus, and work with us with hyphens in between. You'll find our online training and our book proposal templates. And I think there's some other stuff on there too. Yeah, some are our interactive learning scenarios as well. So that's a great place to to start, working in it, because the templates give you a really good idea of sort of what kind of questions we want to ask you and help you again, like build that sort of business case for your project. But if you're not quite ready to do that, you can also just reach out to me or, reach out to somebody in the field and just like start like putting together some ideas. I'd really like you to have a informed, do some research and have a couple thoughts like, hey, I might do a book on this or this or this. What do you think? But I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody who's interested and wants to talk through it some more.
Cool, great. Yeah, just for reference, I've been trying to get a book with you guys for 7 years. So there was a lot of thought behind that proposal.
Yeah,
it was like my final hurrah.
And we just met at a conference. I mean, we had talked I think before that, but you never know, just meeting somebody at a place sometime can totally mean you got them on the hook to write a book for the next 2 years. So. Yeah. Funny enough, I was supposed to be in Germany at that time for a conference. I was filling in for someone who couldn't make it, and I wanted to hang out and see you. So yeah, it worked out. Francesco, any kind of parting thoughts on this? Yeah, would you do it again?
Not sure. I definitely would do it with the publisher, and the thing is, I probably wouldn't do it on AI and a technical book on AI, because the field evolves so fast that I find that the time it takes you to write the proper book is about the time where all the frameworks are updated. And so especially if you start with a code, by the end of the writing a book, you have to update all your libraries and update all your code, right? So I would probably skew on writing a book that has a longer time horizon, what are the implications of AI? What are the impact AI has on society? I'm very much interested in that right now than a technical book, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, Rob, how about you?
Yeah, totally. And to echo Francesco, I don't think I'd write another technical book on AI. I'm super interested in the cultural side. I'm especially interested in the way that AI is portrayed in art, especially in cinema. So I would love to write a book about the way that robots have been portrayed in cinema over the last century, which will probably get more readers than my current book anyway.
Good idea.
Yeah. So how about you, Dean? Yeah. When are you going to stop writing?
I need to finish this book in the next few months, but I have been actually thinking about it, going to what Francesco just said. What have we learned about modularity and other supposedly good ideas over the last few decades? Something that's a little bit more longer time horizon, both backwards and forwards. That's sort of maybe the last book I'd want to write.
Yeah. So Rustem, how about you? Yeah. Any parting thoughts? Any tips or?
Well, I don't know, I think basically it's very the problem with writing another book is it's very hard to plan for it. So it's you kind of start living different lifestyle where you try to find every spare half an hour. For me, the funny part, when I was writing Caltrain to work, I used that time over basically over several months to write a book, and I think that's the main challenge, to find dedicated time to it.
Yeah, you're the third or fourth person that's told me that the Caltrain has inspired your book and actually got you to stay focused that hour and a half. That train ride.
Thank goodness for public transport inefficiency.
Yeah. And bad traffic. Yeah. We're at the top of the hour, and I think we'll close it out. So yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Jess, so much. Please, get a hold of Jess, submit a proposal, and see you guys hopefully in person soon.
Hope so too.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.